So my name is Catherine Paul, and I am thrilled to introduce this session. We have Wendy Foster from Simon Fraser University here in Vancouver, and we have Kyle Mathews from Brigham Young University, and he also has his own company, which I can't... Edugly? Okay, he'll tell you more about it. But they are going to be talking about active collaboration design patterns for open education. One of the fascinating things about this that I just found out is that the two of them were emailing. They were put together in this session to work together and had been emailing, but just met yesterday for the first time. And after their conversation, decided to completely integrate their presentations into one, which I thought was pretty cool considering they're modeling exactly what they're talking about. So they've done this in the afternoon and today, and so this is their first run, and I just wanted to say thank you for coming, and I hope that thank you all for being here.
Thanks. So I'm Wendy Foster, and
Because for the...
Oh yeah, I'm just gonna...
streaming. Oh.
Yeah, it should be fine there.
Okay.
I'm Wendy Foster. I'm a graduate student in the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University. And my primary area of research is demographic game design, but I'm involved in the creation of open learning workshops for middle school girls, teaching them how to create and design their own games. And this is a non-formal practice, so that's my connection to the open education community. So today I'll introduce a little bit about what we're going to be presenting today, and then I'm going to move into a discussion of design patterns and how they can leverage communities of practice. We'll talk a little bit about design guidance versus design patterns and some of the ways we can begin to transform design guidances and principles into collaborative patterns. We'll take a look at the anatomy of a design pattern, and then work through an example seed design. And I'll introduce you to some resources which you can look at on your own time offline. So what we're hoping to do is I'm going to present a more didactic framework of the design pattern, and Kyle's work is going to provide a practical implementation of design patterns in practice. And what we were intending is that there would be space and time left at the end of the presentation to hold a bit of a workshop, so that we could collaboratively produce some seed patterns together based on your own fields of engagement. So we're hoping that this will work out this way. So originally my submission to the conference was a conceptual paper, and what I was looking at was mobile device affordances for open learning and considering how these affordances could be leveraged towards community resource building. Given the limitations of a joint session though, Kyle and I decided that it was going to be a better practice to more closely integrate our work. So as I stated before, I'm going to be focusing specifically on design pattern formation today. And so I'm going to move on. Well, actually, one thing that I want to mention that my original presentation had taken up, the bullet points on the slide that you're looking at are what's commonly conceived to be as the specific affordances of mobile devices for open learning. But what I was going to use these affordances for were as opportunities to construct pattern typologies to begin the formation of a pattern collection. So it's something you might want to keep in the back of your mind if you're interested in developing your own patterns, is that when we're looking at affordances, we can often move from affordances to particular case studies, and then from case studies, we can begin to extract patterns. So if we have time and opportunity to workshop some of these at the end, that's probably the kind of methodology we'd want to work on together. Okay. So design patterns, if you're not familiar with them, were first elaborated in the field of architecture and urban planning by Christopher Alexander, and are documented in his seminal texts, A Pattern Language, Towns, Building, Construction, which was published in 1977, and further in The Timeless Way of Building, which he published in 1979. So adopted in the computing sciences for particularly object-oriented programming practice, design pattern languages have been taken up by the design sciences more generally and have found particular favor in human-computer interaction design. Alexander's own interest in formalizing design practice led him to the development of a pattern language for architecture. This was intended to address what he saw as the misapplication of method within his field, as well as speak to the real-world needs of the users of designed environments. And I find this one of the most fascinating aspects of the conceptual grounding of design patterns, is Alexander felt particularly that the user's experience of built space was discounted during the architectural design process. So pattern languages for Alexander are meant to reinsert the end user back into the design equation, particularly as a point of design priority. And I think that that speaks to our concerns as open learning designers as well. So as a conceptual tool, a pattern is simply a solution to a problem in context. And Alexander's patterns are generally composed of three components: the situation, the problem, and the established solution, excuse me. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Yishay Moore and Neil Winters. So they're from the London Knowledge Lab, and they've been central in developing a participatory workshop model for pattern language development in open education contexts. So Moore and Winters emphasize pattern development as a community endeavor, and importantly, an open model of technology-enhanced learning practice. Consonant with the philosophical grounding of open education initiatives, Moore and Winters' open model extends beyond providing just simple access to code and content. So open design languages can offer iteratively developed context and examples for effective use, modification, repurposing, and the reconstruction of technology-enhanced learning tools. And perhaps more centrally, and this is specific to Moore and Winters' work, pattern languages can provide a collaboratively supported distribution channel for the knowledge. So the adoption of a pattern language approach for open education can facilitate iterative development and the production of collaborative resources which can be used to supplement existing OER repositories. So pattern languages, unlike static resources, which often sit in the repositories, are dynamic and evolutionary. Pattern languages, if they're fully engaged, can provide current best practices and socio-technical solutions to both established and emergent problems in the field, and this is due to their inherently collaborative nature. So we'll move on. So conventionally in the design sciences, design guidance is elicited from problems encountered during the design and testing phases, and is often combined with future work. And most designers either adhere to design guidance or principles as practice. Patterns have yet to penetrate the diversity of design sciences, although it's becoming more and more common. And this includes the learning sciences as well, and instructional design. So the problem-solution format of design patterns is widely held to provide designers with more concrete design information that's not readily available in other forms of design knowledge representation, such as principles and guidelines. As Sherry Frizzell and Roland Hubscher note, in using design patterns to support e-learning design, because the patterns in the language form a cohesive structure, the designer is able to begin with a certain context and work through all of the relevant patterns to generate a design in succession. These patterns are linked to form the language. So guidelines, conversely, have been seen to suffer problems involving selection, validity, and applicability. They're produced from case studies, but there's no one who kind of verifies them, right? Even when they're implemented in other practices, sometimes the contexts are so radically different that we can't get a sense of their validity or reliability as generalizing structures. So patterns can help alleviate some of those problems. Chung et al. In Development and Evaluation of Emerging Design Patterns for Ubiquitous Computing note the following distinctions between guidelines and patterns for capturing and representing design knowledge. First, patterns offer solutions to specific problems rather than providing high-level and sometimes abstract suggestions. Second, patterns are generative, helping designers create new solutions by showing many examples of actual designs. Third, patterns are linked to another hierarchically, helping designers address both high-level as well as low-level problems. And the linkages are not semantic, they're real. So within the pattern, you're actually making a real link to a related pattern. So design principles and guidance, however, are not useless. I think they're a really wonderful first step in the creation of a pattern language, and I find them particularly useful for creating general typologies, which may govern the structure of your pattern collections. So they're still useful to produce, they're still useful to review and read. So patterns, this is one thing I thought was quite interesting when I was coming across it, and patterns seem to evoke for me what Donald Shawn identifies as design as a reflective conversation with materials, because patterns are involved in a conversation not only with each other, but between the users who are iterating them. So patterns, by their nature, if they're used as intended and according to their nature, provoke interaction and integrative process by default. So this is the essential anatomy of a design pattern, and I wanted to stress that these particular categories that I've decided to show are typical, but you should feel free, if you're going to use pattern languages, to modify your categories to fit your discipline and your own needs. So I'll just run through them quite briefly. The information section normally includes the pattern name. The pattern name is one of the most essential elements in the pattern because it becomes integrated into the design vocabulary. So it's what people are going to be searching for when they're looking for a pattern to follow. And ideally, you want the title to concisely represent the problem that your pattern is trying to solve. So the problem section describes when to apply the pattern and explains both the design problem that is addressed and the context that surrounds it. In the solution section, you're going to want to describe the elements that make up the design to solve the problem, and this normally includes a rationale. So the solution statement in this section is, along with your rationale, are what is going to be able to provide deeper levels of insight to the readers of your pattern and the users of your pattern. The examples section clearly provides specific implementations of the solution. So generally, the format of your examples is going to be discipline specific. It may be textual or visual or a combination of the two. Computing sciences, for example, often uses UML diagrams to accompany solutions and help clarify example implementations. But I've seen other design patterns, particularly for learning, that involve cartooning, different forms, whatever is going to be most available to your field. One thing I wanted to point out is the level of abstraction for the examples that you're going to be including in your patterns. This needs to be carefully considered and is probably one of the most difficult things about pattern writing, and it just takes practice. The level of abstraction is crucial to the development of a good and a useful pattern for others. So examples which are too concrete, they're not easily transferable. And examples which are too general, are difficult to apply to specific problems. And I'll show you a brief example of a seed pattern once I get through this framework. And you'll see that the author of that pattern has managed to hit the precisely correct level of abstraction that makes it transferable to a wide variety of domains. So the relationship section of a design pattern references the other patterns that support the solution. So the links between patterns are often considered in the community to be as valuable as the pattern itself. And these links are the structuring principle and what organizes a set of patterns into a specific pattern language. Now, the discussion section is a relatively new addition to the pattern taxonomy, but I find it one of the most useful and interesting additions. Moore and Winters use something similar to this section by adopting the convention of a case study that's linked to the design pattern. So Moores and Winters define their case studies as relatively structured narrative descriptions that are going to start mapping pattern use experiences. And so you can look at this section as integral to the iteration of your pattern. Other implementations are more loosely defined, and I've seen them used really richly as threaded discussion sections for online pattern repositories. Some patterns in the discussion section also include community-generated validity rankings, which indicate the degree to which the pattern authors and pattern users have confidence in the pattern solution. So the creation of value systems for design patterns helps clarify best practices, and I want to stress that valuation systems for design patterns are user-generated. They're not imposed by external authorities who are evaluating it according to different criteria. It's actually based on the pattern's use value, so they kind of like engage in conversations with the pattern as opposed to create some kind of power hierarchy within it. So the example I wanted to show you is actually developed by Yishay Moore. And the title of the pattern is Challenge Exchange. So what you'll notice about the title is that it's concise. It adequately defines the problem that the pattern is going to seek to solve. And this is precisely what you're going to want to aim at, something that is giving you keywords in the title. The problem is defined as learners are often intimidated by challenges set by teachers or simply do not want to appear as cooperating with the system. The teacher may not know the right level of challenge to set in order to engage learners. So something that I wanted to point out about how this problem statement is articulated is that it's framed from the perspective of the user. And while this is particularly important for learning implementations, it was the original intent of design patterns more generally, is that you always want your problem statement to be rooted in and derived from problems that the user might have with it. The pattern is supposed to solve a problem for them, not be particularly concerned with like the problems of the designer per se. So the solution that Moore has proposed, I think is perfect. It lets you transfer the instructions to a wide variety of domains. So Moore says, let learners create their own challenges and pose them to each other as a game. The rules of the game vary slightly according to the content and media, but the general structure is the same. 1, create a challenge, 2, publish it, 3, receive the response and respond to it appropriately, and 4, respond to your peers' challenges. And you notice Moore also provides a rationale suggesting that the pattern is particularly valuable because it breaks down class hierarchies, promotes a sense of community of learning, and I think most importantly for Moore, allows community self-regulation of challenges. So you can begin to see in this seed how a pattern is going to function for especially learning design. And what you'd want to do with this initial seed is then start elaborating it in relation to other patterns, other resources from other collections, not necessarily ones that you're containing your own, but through a kind of community of pattern making. So there's a link in the comments section to the conference posting this section. I've made my slides available. These are just some resources I thought if you're interested in implementing patterns into your own design practice that you might want to look at, and I would particularly call your attention to the video course on workshopping pattern language development that Moore and Winters make available on their website. It's incredibly useful, and these are all like open learning resources as well. So I'm going to turn presentation over to Kyle now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So this is kind of the agenda for my part of the presentation. Let's see, we start at 1:30, so I'm going to take about 15-20 minutes, so we'll have some time for the workshop at the end. But I'm introduce myself first. I'm going to demo the software project that I've been working on for the past couple years at BYU. Talk about the design principles behind the software that we're developing. Then I'm going to be talking about problems of designing and using group software, particularly using group software in context of learning, education, and so forth. And then talk some more about why patterns rock and everyone should use them. Okay, so first, who am I? So I'm a graduate student at BYU in Information Systems, which means I'm not educator, academic, whatever, perhaps like most of you are. I'm more a technologist, entrepreneur, interested in designing cool stuff, particularly designing things to help organizations work together better. And my current project is I'm starting a company called Eduli, which is going to be a provider of a social learning platform. And Island, the website, is kind of the base of the product that we're building that you'll see in a bit. So so we'll run through the design goals real quick of the platform, and then we'll go through the demo, and then kind of go over these design goals in more detail. But basically they are these 4 things. There's first to move control and responsibility for learning to the learners, away from the institution and teachers. Provide collaborative learning tools for classrooms and other formal learning communities, and then serve as scaffolding for growing a diverse ecology of informal learning communities. And kind of overarching design goal is that the goal of the platform is to facilitate conversations, not to just deliver content. It seems that most platforms, that's kind of their goal, is just move content around. But my focus is much more on let's get conversations going, because I think, you know, good bad content is infinitely preferable to, you know, bad conversation about really good content. So yeah, move on to the demo. So these are what we're going to demo. Move over to the website. So first is the website. You can go to if you want. It's completely public. Almost all the groups here are public, though private groups are allowed as well. This is the groups page here. So there's about 70 groups now, I think, that have been created. And these groups, anyone that's at BYU can create a group. It's to be on the site, you have to be a BYU, have a BYU ID. But once you're in the site, you can create a group if you want, or you can join any group that's on the site, unless it's closed, because some class groups are closed. But most of these groups here are groups just created by students. And you'll notice a lot of these are technical related, because it's started in information systems, which is my major. It's been used most extensively there. So there's quite a variety of groups. And some groups are really successful. They have lots of conversations, lots of members. Other groups are dead in the water. But, you know, it doesn't cost anything to have an additional group, so it doesn't really matter much. So first we'll look at creating a discussion. So you can create a discussion two ways. You can create the discussion through the web interface, or you can create it by email. And I have a great group called For Testing, Do Not Join, which the group is for testing, so none of you join it, please. But and so to start a discussion, you just say starting discussion from email, and you say hi everyone, and then you click send, and that's it. And then it takes about a minute or so for it to be posted on the website. So in the meantime, we'll start a discussion through here. So the same thing, this is my list of the groups I belong to. So I can click on here, go to the group page, or the group kind of homepage, dashboard, whatever you want to call it. In each group, it has a title, it has a wiki, so you can have static content then here. And then it has kind of like a blog, it has the latest stuff. And these is not a very exciting group, actually. Mostly test. And then in each group, you can do a number of different things. You can create a discussion, a job posting. You can organize an event. So like we're having an event, get together on such and such a day, such and such a place. Or you can create wiki pages. And then also you can search within each group. And so normally though, most people just create discussions, because that's the typical way that's used, just for kind of back and forth about whatever. So game thing, same thing. So you say test discussion from web site hi, and then you click save, and there it is. And so if you go back to the home page, you know, it's the latest one. Oh, and the email discussion came in too, that we created from email. So, and by the way, if anyone has questions about what I'm showing, you know, ask now, because you probably won't have a chance, or you might forget before or later. So creating group. So like I said, anyone can create a group. So you just click on groups, create your own. And this can be a student or a teacher. So if a teacher wants a class group, you know, they just fill out this form. You know, title, description, you have group type. So it can be class, great geographic area for like alumni or something, around an interest or a major. Status, that's not important. And then there's kind of different types of groups. So it can be open, it can be moderated, it can be invite only or closed, so completely private, just depending on the needs of the group. Then you make that and you click save. Yeah. And then other example, let's see. You can also create simple image galleries, you know. This is from a trip to southern Utah to Zions National Park. Lovely place. You know, cycle through the pictures, the panorama I made. So on. Yes?
Is it built in Drupal?
Yeah, it's Drupal. Shows its science, yeah, origins. Yeah, and also it's easy to manage. So like, for example, if you want to join a group, again, it's really simple. You just click join, and then yes, you join. So this is kind of the base system for a lot of things, and it's built around groups, and you have formal learning communities to build around these groups, or informal learning communities, and so forth. So does anyone have any questions about the demo? Yeah?
I'm sorry, what is the Google Web Toolkit?
It's a technology. It's that Google has released for, you write something in Java and output as this Ajax-rich internet application. So that's pretty cool, actually, if you're interested in that sort of thing. Yes?
So you said formal or informal groups, so formal groups being defined by the institution, do you see the information?
Well, you could easily. Right now, I haven't done that yet at BYU just because it's difficult to do that at BYU, and it just hasn't, the cost benefit hasn't paid off yet. But it would be very easy to integrate it so that a teacher could say, new group, this is my class, and presto, it's all there. Just I haven't done it yet. But technically, it's not a problem at all. But how I'm defining formal and informal is essentially a defined learning community, a class, in other words, where you have a teacher and students, and it's predefined who's there and what you're studying. So it's all formalized structure and so forth. Informal is these groups like the Google Web Toolkit, where it could be anyone on campus who's interested in this particular subject, and they can join, and the tenor and the direction and the activities that the community participates in is completely set by the participants. So it's informal. But I really think that concept is really powerful because instead of, it's a lot more serendipitous because you can draw in people from across multiple majors that have different perspectives and so forth, and it connects people who otherwise couldn't be connected. So yeah, and also these groups too, they're not tied to courses, so they can span multiple semesters and years and so forth. Okay, so moving on. So I think these first two here, moving control to learners, provide collaborative learning tools for formal environments, learning communities. That's pretty straightforward for most people in this cloud. The scaffolding for growing a diverse ecology for informal learning communities. That's, I think, a bit of a new idea, especially the ecology of informal learning communities. So John Seeley Brown, he provided this definition for learning ecologies, and he basically said it's a collection of overlapping communities of interest that cross-pollinate with each other, constantly evolving and largely self-organizing. And I think this really powerful concept, that this ecology is it can grow organically and be alive. And much of what I'm trying to do with Island Edgley is designed to support that sort of thing. This concept is also talked quite a bit about in this article that recently came out this year called Design, Education, Innovation, Ecotones, which is an excellent article. Just to quote part of it, says, when the opportunity arises, these microlabs can coalesce into one larger lab with tremendous diversity and richness of talent. Breaking apart again, they may redistribute talent and resources. A network of microlabs creates a horizontal rhizomic structure in which the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. The networked microlab can adapt to new questions and opportunities from outside as well as inside the network. So, a common issue, in information systems and many other fields is there's constantly new knowledge being created, but the classes lag by 3 or 4 years behind the technologies just because it takes that long to push forward new class through the curriculum committee and for teachers to learn the new technologies and adapt to it. But the idea that these informal learning communities, that students can kind of take control of the learning themselves and push forward with it, facilitated through the online collaborative learning tools. So now moving on to the kind of process behind designing social software. And this is a really tricky problem for lots of reasons. First, the problem is that when you're designing for a group, you inevitably have a conflict between group interest and the individual interest. There's kind of a law in cybernetics that if you optimize the outcome for a subsystem, this will in general not optimize the outcome for the system as a whole. So an optimization for a subsystem is, generally speaking, a sub-optimization for the whole. And this is kind of an example of the tragedy of the commons, where if people put their self-interest first, then the interest of the whole will be hurt. And so when you're designing group software, you have to design it so that the group as a whole works well, not that any individual within using the group software has an optimal experience. So generally speaking, I kind of tend towards the group because I think the group is the most important unit for learning. Richard Light did a lot of studies out of Harvard that the strongest determinant of student success in higher education is their ability to form or join study groups, much more than the style of the teacher or pretty much anything other factor that they looked at. So Island is kind of like completely narrowed down on trying to optimize the creation of learning communities in whatever form. Get as many students joining and participating in as many learning communities as possible. Another complication of designing and developing group software is it's kind of a shift from, software design is kind of embedded in the mindset that you're designing software for a computer and a single individual. So if you're using Microsoft Word, it's just you and the computer. So the designer's not thinking about any other variables that could happen. It's very simple binary, like doom, 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 back and forth. But when you're designing social software, you have potentially thousands of humans all operating independently, mediated by the software. And so the number of variables that the designer has to account for is infinitely more than when you're just designing for human computer software. So Clay Shirky put this really well. He says, most of the important work in social software has been technically simple but socially complex. And so, you're not worried so much about the technical issues when you're designing social software. Those variables are fairly straightforward and easily solved. But once you have groups interacting, you just have all the complications that come from humans trying to communicate and interact with each other. And you have to somehow mediate that through the software. So back to using social software in learning. So the problem that, one of the problems that Island's trying to solve is how to design effective learning classroom. And, the problem is that teachers, by and large, do not fully understand the problem of how to design and run an effective classroom. Like, I am just about ready to graduate, so I have plenty of recent experience with, utterly terrible classes. And just generally speaking, teachers don't really get what they're doing. And they try, some of them, but a lot of them fail. And introducing the social media just blows the whole thing out of control because it's just, enormously more complex. Once you have kind of this, interaction not just within the classroom, but you have all this online stuff going on, and the poor teacher's head might explode trying to figure it all out and run it effectively. And it's probably many of you have, experienced trying to introduce this to teachers. They just say, no, I'm not even gonna go there because they don't already understand what they're doing, so why add more complications? And this, Christopher Alexander, the patterns guy, he, in this book, The Synthesis of Form, I love this quote. It explains a lot to me. He says, today functional problems are becoming less simple all the time, but designers rarely confess their ability to solve them. Or inability, I think it's supposed to say. Instead, when a designer does not understand a problem clearly enough to find the order it really calls for, he falls back on some arbitrarily chosen formal order. The problem, because of its complexity, remains unsolved. And that's exactly what I see happening to many teachers, is that the teacher does not understand the problem of, this is the subject, these are the students, this is their level, he doesn't understand the problem of how to design the classroom so that the students go through it clearly. And so he or she falls back in some arbitrarily chosen formal order. In other words, they just, it's kind of like the saying that teachers teach how they are taught, that sort of thing. They just pick some pattern of teaching and throw it into the classroom regardless of whether it makes sense or not. Like in business school, it's like, a de facto law that every teacher has to have a group project where you get put in a group and you have some assignment you write some paper and you do group presentation, and like every single teacher does it. And I have no clue why, because most of the time it doesn't really make sense, but they don't really understand what they're doing, so they just pull that arbitrarily chosen formal order out and thrust it into the classroom, and we get to go through it, the students, that is. So and Alexander's answer and mine is the way to combat this increasing complexity of teaching resulting from throwing the addition of social media tools on it is use patterns. Because patterns are a very nice way of collecting solutions to problems. They're common solutions for common problems. They bridge the gap between, I'm in this context, I have this problem, what is the solution? So forth. So, and I think that we as a community start writing patterns and organizing patterns. It's a really effective way, I think, for sharing knowledge. It's like each of us, none of us understand this problem as a whole, but I understand some of the problems and the solutions pretty well, and some of you understand other problems and solutions pretty well. And so if I write the patterns about things that I know, then you write patterns about things you know, then when you're designing a class, you can say, I want to have something with wiki, because wikis are great for collaborative writing, but you don't really understand that problem and the solution very well. But you can see the patterns written by people who have used wikis for a long time very effectively in their classroom, and you can quickly understand how to implement that design learning, or that learning design pattern in your classroom. Okay, so that's pretty much my presentation. So I threw together this list of resources of books and articles and whatnot that I've read and really influenced me. You're not going to be able to write them all down right now, but I'm going to post this on my blog and tweet about it. But so there's some books here just about networks, about social software, about designing social software, so forth. And then there's also some links here to different collections of social software patterns that have started been developing. This actually, Designing Social Interfaces, is the upcoming book by O'Reilly that they're publishing about a pattern book for designing social software, which looks really great. But we'll move on from that. And then last, my company, we're doing a private beta of the software that I was demoing earlier. Basically, if you sign up and you're interested in using the software, we'll create an instance for your institution, which you can create a group for your classroom. And if you go to edgely.com, you can fill out this nice form, and I'll be in contact with you. So that is it. So let's see, how much time do we have? Okay, so questions for either of us? Yeah.
I'd be interested in seeing how you integrate the wiki with the islands. Each group gets its own wiki.
Yeah, there's. Oh, so yeah. He was interested in seeing how I integrated wikis here on Island. And so each group has two sort of wikis, essentially. There's kind of like a group wiki, which can be used for static or just, kind of general information about the group or resources about the topic. This isn't a very good example, actually. We'll go to the Drupal group, because it's my favorite group. So, for example, the Drupal group wiki, it explains what is Drupal, what can you use Drupal for, and then it has a list of like resources, if someone just getting started in there can see. So it's kind of like the core of the group, the core knowledge for that group. And then you can also just create wiki pages, which essentially just, title, body. But the difference between that and something else is that anyone can edit it, so, which is the core of a wiki. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah?
How are you licensing the system?
What do you mean?
Are you going to kind of publish how to make it yourself, or?
Well, the idea is it'll be a hosted system. So right now we're just doing a trial because it's not particularly polished, and we have kind of the core working pretty well. You know, the discussions, it's been used extensively in the past year or so for that sort of thing. But we're looking for more teachers to use and give us feedback this fall and winter. And then beyond that, the plan is to offer as kind of on a freemium model. So anybody, any teacher who wants to use it can sign up and have an instance of it and use it, and then we'll try to convert universities to a paying model, or they'll pay us for integration with their systems and custom development and so forth.
There's another system that was designed by Howard Reingold called Social Media Classroom.
Yeah, yeah.
Also built in Drupal, and
yeah.
It's basically missing this piece.
Right.
The group part. So I was wondering if you knew of ways of working with them to help them push some of this in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the groups part. Yeah.
Because they seem to think that it wasn't when they were making it. That it wasn't really the grouping wasn't a requirement for building it, and they haven't heard much from the teachers and professors that have been working with it that groups was necessary.
Right.
But I think it is.
Yeah, I've read like them talking about it, and they seem to think, you know, that they're providing training wheels or something for using social media in the classroom, where groups takes more sophisticated understanding of how to interoperate in a larger, more nebulous learning space or whatever. So,
Are you releasing the code for this?
I'm.
Based on Drupal?
Well, I don't have to because I'm not distributing it. That's the GPL. But I am seriously what?
If you create a premium service, do you not have to release the code outside of
Well, yeah, I don't want to. Okay, I am planning on releasing it. Yeah, I am planning on releasing this down the road. Just right now, it's not really in a releasable state. But
Right, no, but
I think, yeah, that is the eventual plan.
You have to release the base module. but
Right.
You don't have to release the configuration.
That's right, yeah.
And that's what things do
Yeah, because Drupal isn't anything until you configure it. So, but that is the plan, is assuming the business model can sustain, and I think it will. I don't think it'll be a problem releasing the open source. This is a package that anyone can download and use. Yeah, yeah.
So, can you give us a little insight into the sort of educational specific features that you're thinking about adding to this? Because maybe I don't mean this to sound aggressive at all, but I'm sort of seeing a set of features that's available in Google Groups here for the most part, or something like that.
Right.
Which is missing, which is very generic. So maybe you could comment on that.
Well, yeah, the idea of this isn't to, I mean, it is duplicating features found elsewhere. The idea is that, it's a service that the school can own and control and so forth. Second, it's a common interface so that any teacher, any student across the school can use the same interface for the same purpose. So instead of one class using Google Groups, another class going off to Yahoo Groups, and so on, everyone can kind of use the same thing. So basically, it's like kind of bringing together the best-of-breed learning collaborative tools into one package, and kind of create a generic, simplified interface that everyone can use. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question for Wendy. Have you applied the patterns to demographic games and your middle school girls games and so on?
Yes, actually, so the question was, how do I apply patterns to demographic game design? I'm just in the process of doing an analysis of my model right now, but essentially I did experience sampling of the middle school girls I'm working with. And I'm analyzing their data with regard to their preferences and experiences, particularly with technologies in their everyday activities. And I'm extracting patterns from the activity clusters that I'm identifying. And what I use those activity clusters and patterns for is to iteratively inform the curriculum for the workshops I develop for them. So my end goal is to see if the curriculum, the game design curriculum, based on their real-world activities and on the patterns I'm able to draw from their day-to-day lives, actually produces better learning experiences for them. And I'm measuring that in terms of normal outcomes, testing them for like programming knowledge, and I bring game industry experts in to evaluate their games. So.
I'm going to just close since our time is up.
Okay. Well, just one.
Sorry. Yeah.
Also, this is the wiki we've set up to collect patterns. So I just want to put out, there's nothing here. We put up this wiki yesterday, so it's very blank. But if you're interested in the pattern idea, we'd invite you to come to the site, contribute patterns, and so forth. Yeah, it's just sociallearningpatterns.org. You need to add the index.php right now. Something's wrong with permissions on the web, on the server. But anyways, we're done.
Great. So thank you very much for coming in, and thank you, Kyle and Wendy.